Hello everyone, in this video I'll be going over Chapter 8, Memory, and I'll be discussing the basics of memory, the brain and memory, different problems associated with memory, and how to improve our memory. So first, what are the basics of memory? So memory is a set of processes used to encode, store, and retrieve information over different periods of time. Similar to how we describe cognition and thinking as a file cabinet, our memory kind of acts like a computer. So it encodes information based off what you input into it, and it stores that information in its memory storage, similar to a computer. And when you want to access that information again, we need to retrieve it from its memory storage. And so memory can often act like a computer or a computer's hard drive. And the first basic element of memory is encoding, which is the input of information into the memory system. Once we receive sensory information from the environment, our brain labels and codes it, and encoding information occurs either through automatic or effortful processing. And automatic processing is when the encoding of details like time, space, frequency, and the meaning of words occur without any conscious awareness or effort to retain that information. Whereas effortful processing is when the encoding of details like time, space, frequency, meaning of words occurs with conscious attention and with our effort to retain. And then an example could be automatic versus manual driving. So automatic processing, we just stick the gear in manual or in automatic, and in drive, and we're able to drive a car automatically. Whereas for effortful processing, this might look more like a stick shift, where you have to consciously attend to which parts of the engine you're trying to move, either gear 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. So with manuals, we might have to consciously put our effort and attention, whereas automatics, it just happens without conscious awareness, and we don't have to think about switching gears in automatics. And there are three types of encoding. The first is semantic encoding, which is the encoding of words and their meanings. So it's trying to encode what the meaning of words are. There's visual encoding, which is the encoding of images. For example, when you see these words, which words pop out to you that show an image in your head? Most likely it will be the words of tree, cat, or car that you'll automatically associate an image with, whereas truth or value may not produce a visual image in your head. And then lastly, there is acoustic encoding, which is the encoding of sounds. And for example, maybe when a song comes on the radio or when it randomly plays on Spotify, you remember the lyrics to a song automatically. And this means that your memory encoded the acoustics of the song, like the tone or the beat or the lyrics. So now you're able to sing along to it and recite it over again when you want to retrieve that information. And the next basic element of memory is storage, which is the creation of a permanent record of information passing through sensory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. So this is kind of an image to explain those different parts. So first, in sensory memory, it includes sensory input of whatever we take in from our five senses. And then sensory memory is translated to short-term memory, which we'll explain, which is then translated to long-term memory, which we'll explain further. So sensory memory includes stimuli that is first processed and sensory memory, which is the storage of brief sensory events such as sights, sounds, and tastes, and only lasts for a few seconds. So this is a very brief storage of information for a couple of seconds, but only if we attend to the important bits of information that we want to remember, or the bits of information that we see as valuable. Only then will we be able to transfer that information from sensory memory to short-term memory. So for example, when we look at this list of words here, we can see that the words have a color and have a different color to what the actual name of the color is. And we pick up that sensory information when we look at it. So we can read that the word is red, but we can also see that the color of the word red is blue. And so when we pick up that sensory information, we're actively attending and distinguishing the color from the word, and this is the sensory information that we're inputting into our sensory memory in order to move that along to our short-term memory. And then once we're able to attend to sensory information, we can then translate that information to short-term memory, which is a temporary storage system that processes incoming sensory memory, and this is sometimes called working memory. And short-term memory takes information from sensory memory here, and sometimes connects that memory to what we already have in long-term memory. And short-term memory storage lasts about 20 seconds or so, but short-term memory is unable to move information from short-term memory to long-term memory unless we use the term rehearsal. And rehearsal is a conscious repetition of information to be remembered. And so if we consciously repeat information such as studying when we want to study for a test, when we rehearse that information, it will most likely go from short-term memory to long-term memory. And that process of rehearsing information in your head in order to remember it helps with memory consolidation, which helps consolidate information from short-term memory to long-term memory. And then the last process of memory is long-term memory, which is the continuous storage of information that has no limits in its storage capacity. And this contains all the information you were able to retrieve from your memory, and this is similar to a computer hard drive, which holds all the computer's information that you have put on the hard drive to save. And long-term memory is composed of two parts. As you can see here, it's composed of explicit and implicit, and we'll describe the difference between each in the next slides. So explicit memory includes memories that we consciously try to remember and to recall. And this includes episodic memory, which is information on events that we have experienced, or a recollection of visual images and feelings associated, or where we were at a particular time or event. This is kind of like the photo image or maybe like a movie playback of your past events or situations you've experienced in your life. And then explicit memory also includes semantic memory, which is information on facts, knowledge, concepts, and language. This can also include facts about people, places, or things. So for example, what's the definition of memory? Or what chapter is memory in the textbook? So information on facts, knowledge, and different concepts. And remember, for explicit memory, we're consciously trying to remember and recall these memories. Whereas for implicit memories are not part of our consciousness, and so it doesn't take conscious effort to remember or recall them. And this includes procedural memory, which stores information about how to do things, or information on how to perform skills or actions. For example, this could be driving a car, or knowing how to brush your teeth, or how to ride a bike. And then implicit memory also includes emotional conditioning, which is information on how to respond to a conditioned stimulus with a conditioned response. And we learn this with classical conditioning, so if you have any issues trying to recall this information and remember it, you can review classical conditioning. And now, so we've established the steps to remember information from sensory memory to short-term memory and then to long-term memory. But now, how do we retrieve that information that we're storing in our long-term memory? The first step is recall, and we recall the information by accessing information without cues or just naturally remembering something on your own. And then next, once we recall that information, we need to recognize it by identifying information that we have previously learned after encountering it again. And this involves a process of comparing what you encounter with what you previously learned. And then lastly, we can relearn something by learning information that we previously learned or adding additional information to what we have already learned. And then that's it for the basics of memory. Make sure to review each step of how to store information from sensory memory to short-term memory up to long-term memory. And then make sure you remember the different parts of long-term memory, and then how to retrieve or recall that stored information in long-term memory.